all these different facets of the world being prepared for these coming seals to unfold in this very practical manner. I think that sometimes when we read Revelation, we just assume that things immediately erupt and we don't take the time to realize that, yes, well, God is sovereign. Okay. He also gives mankind the ability to forge choices. It is not one or the other, it's both. And while he has a sovereign hand over things, he allows for a level of free choice. If he always interrupted us before we made a choice, we would never see the consequences of what our choices, oftentimes in evil, would bring about through consequence. If he always preempted us, no, don't do that. No, don't do that. No, don't do that. So while God has a sovereign hand and he moves and he leads and he allows things or he disallows things by his omnipotent will, he's God, he's huge, he can do whatever he wants. There is this level of human thought and practical actions that have to play into this story of humanity, this 6,000, 7,000 years of human history. And you have to realize that when these seals from the human end of it are being set up, it takes planning. Evil is very intelligent. Not only there's a spiritual kingdom, but that spiritual kingdom, Paul helped us understand in Ephesians 6, works in and through humans. And he says it a little funny, but he talks about in Ephesians 6 that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. He's telling you that behind the humans is a spiritual battle. So it's not one or the other. It's not spirits or humans. It really, when you think about it, you read everything from Genesis to Revelation, you see that it is this commingling between the spiritual world of evil, for what I'm talking about, and the humans. And so you have Masons, you have Kabbalists, you have all kinds of people within government all over the world who are plotting a takeover, a theocracy. And we've talked about that in so many videos. So I invite you to check those things out. And you really see this war rising up, this holy war rising up between unbelievers, irrespective of whether they're Jew or Gentile, unbelievers, and believers. And there are Jew and Gentile believers as well. And so when you see videos like this, and I don't know that this man is a Christian, I have not the slightest clue, but I go over to his channel all the time. I'm very mindful of the many GPS. He's a financial analyst, professional. Honestly, half of what he says, I can't follow because I wish he'd just dumb it down a little bit more, but he doesn't. He is a pro. And he is talking now about Jerome Powell saying that we are not part of the government. That's so creepy that they're admitting that. And the Federal Reserve and the central bankers are kind of their own entities unto themselves. They are unbelievers and they can financially manipulate the system to their advantage. And I think that is the background of understanding these people setting up these seals, and specifically the third seal, that seal of famine that will be worldwide. It won't just be a little famine here or there, although those are bad. Those break my heart. Those make me cry. Those make me pray for people. But we're talking about when you get to the human part of choice, purposing evil for the planet in this time of testing that's coming, this Daniel 70th week, this horrible period of human history in which God just cuts off unbelievers and says, all right, you didn't want me, just go ahead and let evil destroy itself. But he does harvest believers, whether Jew or Gentile. He does harvest souls out of that period of time. And that's kind of why, at least one aspect of why he's going to let this go on, that you can see from the pages of scripture. So the really just massively concerning thing that I have here is, look, Fed admits, that they're not part of the government right before, and look, QE4 begins. Now he's been talking about the quantitative easing, this massive money printing, right? this huge expanding of these worthless paper dollars that have no gold backing them, that what ends up happening is it makes your products and services more expensive, but you get less of them. So your rent or your mortgage jumps up. You need more paper dollars to pay for your bill, so to speak. Or when you go to the grocery store, your cheese, for example, used to cost $6, let's say. Well, now it's going to cost 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever, because of this constant printing of the paper money, right? So that much I know about finance. And it feels to me like they are setting up for this third seal. I don't know when they're going to launch that, but if you understand what happened within the economy and how many people worldwide it touched back in all the other quantitative easings where they're just printing this money, it's basically taking the wealth out of our money and putting it into the ultra rich people's pockets. It's robbery. Is it white collar? It is like the top of the line best deception ever, to steal us blind and to leave us in total debt. Things are happening. I don't know how quickly they're going to elapse, but we are told to watch. So let's listen to a little bit of this, and then I'll leave you a link so that you can check out the rest of his channel, and much more could be said, but let's dive in.
The Federal Reserve prepares for another major event, a chance to make an easy monetary policy even easier. Many want to see a 50 basis point cut, which would be considered extraordinary, but these days anything is possible. The goal is ultimately to get the rates to come down to 0% as fast as possible. All central banks are doing this, so it is considered reasonable and appropriate. They seem to have forgotten something. What about the massive devaluation of their currencies, which affects the vast majority of the population? You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. We always have the Federal Reserve coming online telling everybody that inflation is low. We could see inflation in every corner of the economy and of all of the markets, and yet as long as that core PCE inflation rate that they use remains below 2%, they will say there is no concern. We have had several people from the Federal Reserve talk about how they should do away with the target of this inflation rate, trying to keep it within that 2 and essentially allow it to go higher. They would use this at a time in which they're not necessarily concerned about inflation, but instead worried about job growth and an economy and so on. This would have to come in the next crisis. So we will see this happening. We will see massive quantitative easing. There's no doubt about it. We are already beginning a new quantitative easing cycle. We can see that in July they decided that they were going to cut rates, even though they said, quote, modest pace for growth. And now September, we could be seeing the exact same thing. I'm going to show you something here today that many people are not aware of. The mainstream media did not cover this issue. I'm going to quote from it here. I'm going to talk about the Federal Reserve. I'm going to talk about the financial markets. Then I want to get into what's happening with real economic indicators. There's so much in this video. Let's begin. Larry Kudlow says phone call earlier this week with China on trade went very well. Again, we get this all the time. No matter how many phone calls they make, no matter how many meetings there are, they always went well. That's what they say. They will always use this "they went well" excuse in order to keep everything stable and steady. They're never going to tell you that it didn't go well. And so the market is going to pick up this information. We have computer algorithms. They know the drill. By sending a message like this, you can push the markets up just a little bit higher. The disappointing jobs report would have been much worse without newly hired census workers. Even though this information came out, it really doesn't matter, because the information that people will get is that the jobs numbers are still positive. It doesn't matter what detail is contained within the report. As long as they are reasonable, the market is going to like it. Look, the market didn't go down. The market went up as a result of this. They don't care anymore. That information is finished. If you you find out that in fact it wasn't so good because it was largely due to census workers, that's temporary workers, government workers, that means more money coming out of the government, coming out of your tax dollars, and going to fund these temporary workers. A lot of people are working temp jobs these days. Many people working 2 and 3 jobs just to be able to support their life. Job growth slowed down. You can see what has happened very, very clearly over the last while. This is just showing us from 2018 into August 2019, and it is clear that there is a slowdown that is happening right now that is going on in virtually all sectors. It's not necessarily one or the other, but we're definitely seeing things that are happening today that had not been happening, let's say, in 2017. I'm going to show you a chart that basically gives you a breakdown here, but essentially all I'm trying to show you is that they make things seem really good, but if you're willing to go down one level deeper, you will understand more of the truth. Here you can see on this 34,000 is government, and at the very bottom it just shows you that part of the 2020 census was hiring a whole bunch of people. These are temp workers. That's not a good thing for the economy, maybe temporarily, but ultimately this is going to run out, and then they're going to look for work again. Here you can see that manufacturing had only 3,000 jobs. We know what's happening with manufacturing. It is staying overseas. Doesn't look to be coming back onto US shores anytime soon. I just did a video prior to this talking about how if you look at the most popular jobs today, the ones that are seeing the biggest growth are those that are making $24,000 a year. That is not strength. That is not a good sign, but of course most people don't know what's going on. Okay, so this right here is just a lead into the Federal Reserve and what they have been talking about. Jerome Powell went to Switzerland. He was on stage with a moderator and somebody from the Swiss National Bank. By the time I tuned in to watch it, the event had already started, so I didn't exactly see who the other individual was, but regardless, the quotes here are coming from 2 high-level people within central banks around the world, one from the Fed, one from the Swiss National Bank, and I thought it was incredible, absolutely incredible to hear Jerome Powell say, and I quote, "We are not part of the government." And he was speaking specifically of the Federal Reserve. We are not part of the government. And this tells you yet another sign, yet another indicator that this institution sits outside of the government structure. You can watch that for yourself if you're interested. It's a little long, it's a little boring, but I'm just giving you the details that you need to know. Just imagine for a second, we've been talking about the fact that the Federal Reserve is another entity separate from the government, and yet you get these people coming in all the time and they speak as if this is the saving grace for everybody, that everybody must bow down to the Federal Reserve because they make the sun come up in the morning. Understand the truth even when it's coming out of Jerome Powell's own mouth. My goodness. They are going to decrease interest rates yet again in September according to this information that has come out. This of course is quite dangerous, and I am worried about the implications of this because we have less and less and less room to move down. They're going to have to go right to the floor, and then it will only be a matter of time before they bring it into the negative. But just as the moderator finished off his statements at the very end of this speech, he said something that should piss off a lot of people. Referring to Jerome Powell, he said, "In you we trust." He wasn't talking about Powell himself, but speaking of the central banks. This tells you where people's faith is today. Now you tell me on any other mainstream or alternative resource out there where these 2 quotes coming from, where you have seen anybody else talk about these 2 important quotes. Nobody's covering this data. Fed Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said Friday that ongoing trade issues between China and the U.S. is weighing down companies' investment decisions. "I think it is the case that uncertainty around trade policy is causing some companies to hold back now on investment. We've been hearing quite a bit about uncertainty, so for businesses to particularly make longer-term investments in plants or equipment or software, they want some certainty that the demand will be there." And
So it feels like they're setting up. I don't know how long it's going to take for them to set up, but there is a level of organization that is coming. And so a lot of people were talking about the economist world in 2019, all these pictures going on with it. And of course, there was the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the third one being this global famine. And I was weeping last night thinking of the things that are being propagated and set up for the world and unbelief that's going to be cut off. And it just breaks my heart. I pray as many people as possible get into the covenant with Jesus Christ through the death, burial, and resurrection.